Hey everyone, I'm Dakota or WitheringCrown, and I'm working on a game called Sorcerer Shootout based off of a game jam game that I made in July of 2019. If you want to know more about that game or what I have so far on this one, then check out either that jam video or the Devlog 0 for this game. With that out of the way, let's get into what I did these past 2 weeks. If you watched my last video, then you know I'm doing a sprint kind of system where every 2 weeks I set out to accomplish a goal. This sprint's goal was to make a game out of the mechanics that I had. I wanted to have the functionality of arena mode basically done within this 2-week sprint, and this included adding an altar that would take you to the next wave, a wave system, spawning system, spells, spell tomes, and the mushroom enemy. On Sunday, I spent most of my time editing Devlog 1 to be released Monday, so not much got done that day. On Monday though, the first thing I did was sprite the statue that would be in charge of spawning enemies and going to the next wave. I made it a kind of statue of a mage, and it would have a highlight around it for when the player approached it. After I had that done, I started spriting the portals and that the enemies would come out of. I'm not sure if this sprite will stay, but it's what I'll be using for now. I was thinking that each wave would have like a budget for enemies. This budget would be something like, say, 5. Each enemy would have a price. For example, necromancers could be 2 and slimes could be 1. So the computer would choose to spawn a combination of them, like 2 necromancers and a slime, or 3 slimes and a necromancer, 5 slimes, etc. Once that was complete, I got into actually coding the functionality of the spawner. The first component of the spawner, the statue, is what I got to work on first. I made it so that the statue would spawn a portal somewhere random on the map. Once I had that complete, I wanted to make sure the portal didn't spawn in walls. So to combat that, I added this unstick script, which I already had for the enemies. So I made it so that if they spawn in a wall, then they'll instantly be pushed outside of it. The next thing I wanted to do was get the portals functional. This was honestly a lot easier than I anticipated. I made it so that every second an enemy would spawn based on how much of the budget was left. I also made a DS grid of the enemies and their costs, and after that I decided to call it a night. Tuesday, while I was at school, I decided I would work on the actual wave system portion of the statue. The goal was to have it to where when the enemy is killed, its life essence is sent to the statue. Once the statue had absorbed enough of these souls, it would be powered, and when the player approached it and pressed E, the next wave would begin. So the first thing I did was make a new object, give it a sprite, and set its opacity to 0 so it wouldn't be seen. The reason why I'm giving it a sprite and then making it invisible is to allow it to collide with the statue, but not have the sprite be seen so I can show the particles. I used the same technique with the spells. And then after that I made it to where the souls would start moving towards the statue. After I had the functionality of it moving to the statue, I wanted to get it coming from the enemies. Next, I made it so that when an enemy dies, it spawns one of these soul entities. I was working on this at school, however, and halfway through it was time to go home. When I got there, I had dinner and promptly fell asleep. On Wednesday, I got to work finishing up the statue and wave system that I started yesterday. The next thing I got to work on was adding some other spells. I also get feedback that I should have secondary spells or the ability to swap spells. I decided that the best way to go would be to have a secondary spell list that would have more interesting or powerful spells that would have greater cooldowns. I got started on making the first secondary, which would be like an earthquake type thing that would do damage in an area around the player. The first thing I did for that was make a new DS grid for the secondary spells, pretty much set it up the same way that I did for the normal spells. But with that groundwork, I ran out of time to develop in class. Speaking of suggestions though, I'll take this time to say that I appreciate all of them. However, I won't be able to include all of them, obviously. Probably not even most of them because of either my ability, vision for the game, or time constraints. For example, I get suggestions to add enemies that'll stun or push back the player, but this is something that I really want to avoid. One of my main inspirations for this game is Castle Crashers, but there's one thing that I hated a lot in that game despite loving the rest of it. and that was constantly being knocked down. I don't want to take player agency away with making players not being able to move the way that they want to. I just find taking away this player movement really annoying in games, and I wanted to avoid it. Tangent aside, after looking at the particles, I decided I would rather have it changed to like a poison cloud type attack. I changed up the particles and nerfed the cooldown, but decided to polish and balance it more later. After that was done, I ran out of time for development in that class too, and I decided I would call it a day. Today, I wanted to get a health bar into the game for players. My first idea was to draw a white rectangle that was translucent and very thin right under the character that would represent the character's max health, and a second triangle above that which would have more opacity and represent the current health. Once I implemented that was all I got done that day, and I called it a night. I didn't get that much done, but I got something done, which is what I think really matters. I'm also not sure if this health bar will stay looking the way it does, but if it does, it does. On Friday, I spent some time tweaking the skeleton sprite because I've been getting a lot of comments about it not looking like a skeleton, so this is the new sprite. That's all I did that day though. On Saturday, I got to work on a sprite for the health pickup of the game. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted at first, but I ultimately decided on doing something different than I normally do and make it food. A lot of classic arcade games do this, and I decided it would be fun. I wanted to have different food, so I started spriting some chicken, an apple, and cheese. The next thing I did was actually put it into the game. I made it so that when the player collides with it, they will be healed and the food will be destroyed. I'm really wanting to polish all of this stuff, which is what I would normally do in my standard workflow. With this sprint system, I'm on a time limit, and I have certain times when I'm meant to add features and other times when I'm meant to polish. So I think that the hardest part of development for me is going to be not polishing the game. Polish is one of those things that's really simple to do, and it's really rewarding when you do it, and it just keeps me motivated, you know? I think in the future sprints I'll allow myself time to polish these things, but that was all I did that day. Sunday of the second week, I spent most of the day with my mom. By the time I got back home, it was too late to really do a whole lot, so I just made this spell tome sprite and called it a night. I was actually debating on whether I should use tomes or scrolls, but then I remembered I had primary and secondary spells, so using both would actually be better. I was thinking about using tomes for primary spells and then scrolls for secondaries. On Monday, the only thing I did was make this scroll sprite. I made it my goal to do at least one thing every day to keep me on this project. I haven't done much on the game in a while though at this point, so I wanted to get some more done tomorrow. There are 4 days left until Friday, which is the end of the sprint, and I have 4 tasks left in my Trello board, so I'm going to try to do one of those each day. Today I started working on revamping the spawning system. I wasn't really liking how the portals were working due to the stationary enemies, so I decided to have the enemies just spawn in for now. I'm gonna polish this later by having them either fall in like the original or something different, maybe having like a mini portal that can only fit one creature. Anyway, the first thing I did was get the enemies spawning at a different percentage. Basically this meant the statue would choose a number between 1 and 100, and if the number was below the monster's percentage, then it would spawn that monster. After I had this working, I made it so that the enemies would spawn on a random part of the map at a certain interval, and once that was done, I decided to call it a night. Wednesday, I wanted to get a new spell and a new secondary spell in the game. I started out with a poison ray by making particles and having the projectile shoot really fast and do low damage. I actually called it a night after this because I didn't have a whole lot of time to work today, and tomorrow I knew I'd have more time. I started working in school because I had already finished everything that I had to do in class. The first thing I got to work on in class was a new secondary spell which would make enemies be held in place. While held, enemies could not attack, move, or use any of their other abilities, making them easy pickings to shoot fireballs into. After I did this, I started implementing spell tomes and scrolls. Essentially the way this worked was when the player was colliding with the spell tome or scroll, it would display the name of the spell. For now it looks really ugly like this, but in the future it'll look much better, hopefully. Also, ignore the poison cloud particles, they're too large right now, but I'll fix them when I have time to polish, which I'm planning on doing next sprint. I made it so that when you go to the next wave, it spawns a health pickup and a spell tome. I might change this to when you power the statue, but at the time of making it, I'm not sure. At this point, the only thing left for me to do this sprint was make the mushroom enemy, so I'll do that tomorrow and call it a day for Thursday. Today is the final day of the sprint and the day to finally implement the mushroom enemy into the game. The first thing I did was give the mushroom the ability to damage the player in its area of effect. This was relatively easy to do, and once I was done with that, I made it so that it would spawn other mushrooms. And once that was done, I got to making particles for the spores, and here's the end result. After that was done, I added the mushroom to the spawn tables and called it a night. I'm actually pretty happy with how the mushrooms turned out. They turned out like basically the same as the original, but I really was proud of the original mushroom enemy too. But yeah, that's the end of the sprint. I have some pretty exciting news that I want to share with you guys in the next devlog, but in the meantime, what do you guys want to see in between these devlogs? I thought about day in the life videos, tutorials, speed arts, video essays. Just let me know what you think. Also, you may have noticed my new logo. I'm really happy with it. I designed it in class one day, but Nico Rico on my Discord server made it a usable vector image for me to use. If you want to support the channel or the game directly, there's a link in the description for my Ko-fi page. If you can't afford that, no biggie. Just keep watching these videos and giving me feedback. I really appreciate it. But yeah, there's some really exciting stuff coming up in terms of the channel and the game, so stay tuned. Bye!